and I'm stomping towards my car and I hear and I just stopped. Hi, I'm Dana, and last year I moved to the desert to build an off-grid homestead. This is part 4 of my story. You may want to go back and watch the other 3 parts. They could answer some questions you might have. You may hear snoring in the background, and that is a small 11-year-old dog. She likes to sleep on my bed all day, every day. When we last left off, I was trying to find a structure to live in so that I wouldn't have to car camp all winter in the snow. And yes, I said snow, even though it's the desert, it still gets really cold there in the winter and actually snows. That reminds me, I don't think that I've gone through the seasons in the New Mexico desert with you guys yet. 4 seasons there are Flying Ant Wind Tunnel, then that moves into Oppressive Swamp Ass Monsoon, then you go into fall, which is the hot season, and then you have snow. Those are the 4 seasons in the New Mexico desert. Whenever I would go into town, no matter what town, I noticed in the area that they all had these shed dealers where they would have a bunch of pre-made sheds sitting there and you could just go on site and buy one. So I looked up those types of sheds online, and then I also tried really hard just to find used version of those sheds, something pre-built, where I could maybe save some money. I was definitely on a time crunch and I couldn't really find anything decent. I ended up just driving into town and going to one of the dealers. I felt like I was home shopping for the first time in my life because I'm a millennial and never had the opportunity to have a home. Everywhere I lived, everything was always too expensive. If the jobs were there, then rents and home prices were expensive. And if it was cheap somewhere, there weren't any jobs. I always felt stuck in that way. So this was the first time where I was like, oh, I kind of feel like I'm picking out a home. So I picked out my dream shed home, a 10 by 16 lofted barn, painted barn red with white trim. I thought it was funny in a lot of ways because it was a shed made to look like a barn that I was using as a home. It was a barn shed home. They scheduled the delivery for it just a few days after I purchased it, and I was super excited. But as usual, it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money that I hadn't anticipated buying. It was my plan B, but I really did not want to use that plan B. Like everything with this adventure, I was having to just succumb to the plan Bs and eat the financial cost and watch my plans to build my vacation rentals just disappear. Of course, by securing my tiny home, it shifted my goals and what I was going to work on then, and I decided my main goal right now is to get my home in place and get it insulated and stuff moved in before winter really hit. After all these financial hits, I realized if I was going to survive winter at all, I needed to get a job right away. Now that I had the shed home secured, I wanted to insulate it as soon as possible, try to finish the hyper adobe structure so I had some kind of bathroom for the winter, and find work ASAP, because if I didn't have a job after all the money I bled out, I wouldn't be able to make it through winter without new paychecks coming in. The day after I purchased my tiny home, I decided I'm getting up early. I'm going into Belen, which was the nearest town, and to the coffee shop there that I really liked, which is called Grounded. And I was gonna sit there and apply to jobs like crazy. Grounded is great, by the way. It really saved me. Not only do they have a cheap drink option that I could get, which was 75 cents for a tea, which made it very affordable to go there when I didn't have a lot of money and be able to sit and use the internet without feeling bad. But they're also so nice. Like when I had to return my solar cooler, they just printed out the return labels for me. I was asking them where in town I could do that, and they just did it for me for free. Like they're so nice. After Grounded, because they close at like 2 p.m., I'm pretty sure every day, they close pretty early. So I left there, and on my way back, I went over to Black's Smuggler's Winery, which is another of my favorite places in the area. If you guys are ever driving through, check them out. Tony and his wife Marianne are super sweet. They own the place. I went in there and I was chatting with Tony and telling him how I really wish that I had help on my property to finish this hyper adobe build, and he suggested someone that he knew who just happened to live in the same area that I did. So he gave me that guy's number. I sent him a text. We agreed on a price for his labor, and he said, great, I'll see you tomorrow morning. This was another fun time on my property, even though I was financially decimated and really scared about that. I still had some money left. You know, I had like a number in my mind the whole time that like if my bank account hits this number, then I have to go or I need a job like that day because I won't be able to make it. It was still really enjoyable because Kendra was still there. She didn't have to fly back home yet, so I still had her around. Finding this person to help made me feel like I was going to make progress on the Hyper Adobe. My shed home was about to be delivered. Even though I was really nervous about my money, I was like, I'm gonna be able to sleep in a bed and I'm gonna have somewhere to sleep at night. And if things go well with the Hyper Adobe, I'm gonna have a bathroom too. I was thinking, really at this point, all I need is to find a job and then I'll be able to pay for food and gas and Starlink. I also decided that if I could just hide out in my tiny home shed all winter and do remote work and bank those paychecks, it would also give me time to prepare for the build of the vacation rental the next year and maybe be able to find people that would come and camp on my property because they want hands-on experience building Hyper Adobe. Although things had really gone sideways at this time, I still really felt like my dream is still attainable. It's on a slower timeline, but it's attainable. Like I can still do this. The next day, helper guy showed up that morning when he said he would. Awesome sign. Not everybody does that. Him and Kendra and I all got to laying Hyper Adobe, and he's a big guy. Like he's way taller than us and just like a big dude in general. So he's so much stronger and it just made the process go by so much faster. And he really seemed nice enough. He was totally pleasant to talk to. But one thing that I did notice that before he left that day, he made sure to mention to us that since the police don't really go out to our area, he has pre-dug graves on his property. So if he ever needed to shoot someone that came on his property, he could bury them really quickly and easily. This was something really common in that area, not the pre-dug graves, although it probably is, I don't know, but just like the talk of using violence, unaliving. I always think of it as like posturing big talk. I don't know if that's how, I think that's how I would describe that. You don't really know if they're saying something true or not, but you know that they're telling it to you just in case you're someone who isn't good natured. They want you to feel threatened or whatever. And I get it. I'm sure it's actually something that's really common for any area where there really isn't a police presence and a high crime rate. I was told by everyone that I talked to there to let people know that you are armed, but to never describe what kind of weapons you had. And literally everyone said that because apparently if you say what you have, someone might decide that's something that they want and they might try to go rob you even though you're armed because they know you have a weapon that they would like. So that's another good tip for anyone curious. And you know, it's something before I moved to my property, I thought I was going to open carry on my property at all times, but I ended up hiding my real gun. I only brought out my airsoft, which I really love. I love my airsoft. It's so much fun. It's a Glock 17. And that's the only weapon that anyone ever saw besides Kendra. Kendra knew my real gun. She knew where it was. You know, I wanted to make sure she knew all of that because she was on the property there with me and would maybe need it, but no one else saw it. So the next day, my shed home was delivered and I was on cloud nine. That was so freaking cool to get my shed home. And we could actually empty some stuff out of the shipping container. It felt amazing. It like literally doubled the space that I had on the property to store stuff. So all of a sudden it felt like the world opened up in a lot of ways. Like I had a bed to sleep in, an actual bed. I set up like this mini kitchen inside the shed home. It was just amazing to be able to like do some stuff in the shipping container now because there's actually space to do stuff in the shipping container. It was just very nice. The next day, helper guy showed up again, and this time he showed up with like this big like tub of stuff. He had brought me this amazing present. It had like 2 bouquets of flowers in it. There were like farm fresh eggs. There were wildflower seeds in there, a pumpkin, a DVD, because he collects DVDs and he knows that I collect DVDs as well. Like it was a seriously like sweet and thoughtful gift. And he started off with saying like, oh, I just wanted to give you a present to like welcome you to the area and let you know, like, I hope you make it out here and, you know, let me know if you need anything. Like it was super nice. But then he started making comments about my physical appearance and comments about maybe like being able to date and things like that. Like it definitely like shifted from friendly neighbor present to like dating sexual stuff. So I obviously realized like, oh, this is not just like a neighborly gift. This is like a romantic gesture. And I just like got this sinking feeling because I knew I'd have to tell him like, I don't feel the same way. Like I'd never thought about dating him ever. He was a neighbor and I was paying him to help me. I obviously didn't think of him as like an employee, but I thought of him as someone that I'm paying to help me around my property, who also lives close by. And it's good to know neighbors and know that we could help each other out if we needed to. But I never thought about him in any way beyond that. I think I already mentioned this just like filled me with stress. And I'm sure that people will think that like, oh, you're being dramatic. He just, you know, he wanted to just try and see if you were interested. But it's not really like that. I know people like to write that kind of stuff off, but those situations are more complicated than just, oh, you're not into him, you just need to tell him that. He's someone that was still very much a stranger to me at the time. I didn't know really anything about his character. I had only met him one time before, and unfortunately, a lot of guys, because rejection is hard. Rejection's hard both ways. I have rejection sensitivity. I don't want to reject people. I don't want to be rejected. It feels horrible. But from my personal experience, a lot of guys that I've had to reject, like no matter how nice I try to be about it, they will go off. Like they will get very emotional and erratic, and it's scary. You know, in your mind, you do these assessments, like what do I really know about this person logically when you're in moments like this. And with him, it's okay, what do I really know about him? It's what I've observed so far. That's never going to be a full picture, but it can give me some insights. So what did I know about the helper guy so far? I know Tony liked him. I know he showed up on time, like he said he would. He stuck to our agreement about the pay, you know, so there are positive things that would lead you to go, okay, probably a good dude. But I also know he's abusing substances. He rolled up, you know, both times to my house, already smoking weed at like 8 a.m., 9 a.m., drinking beers in the morning. So he's definitely someone who is self-soothing something with substances more than I would say the average person, because I think most people aren't waking up and smoking weed and then having a beer as soon as they can. I think most people maybe get up and have coffee. That makes me worried that there is emotional instability there, because that can lower people's inhibitions. It can also confuse their thought. Those are warning flags for me. On top of that, he's a lot taller than me, and not just tall, but like a big guy. I knew he owned weapons. I knew he had pre-dug graves on his property. I knew he lived close by to me. He knew where I lived, and he was also love bombing me. I consider that love bombing. I consider giving someone a big present and a lot of compliments when you barely know them as a beginning stage love bomb. And I experienced something similar to this. I'll touch on it in a minute. And that's why I feel that way about it. I've learned that guys that do love bomb have very inflated egos usually, but those egos are really fragile. Like a bubble, they can easily burst. The other thing he knew was that Kendra was leaving soon to go home and that I would be on my property alone. I was taking note of all of this while I was trying to figure out my strategy for letting him know that I wasn't interested in dating him and hopefully having it not blow up in my face. On top of that, I was having like a really overwhelming physiological reaction, and I was trying to just continually soothe that, but it was an overwhelming feeling of panic. Because unbeknownst to helper guy, he looked, sounded, acted very similar to a guy that I met when I was 29. This guy, I think they say SA on here, but I feel like that's not descriptive enough. Grape, I think is how people say, graped me when I was 29, and then stalked me for a year and a half. So there was that on top of it, where just his activities, you know, like the substance abuse in the morning, those kind of things, besides how he spoke, the clothes he wore. And even though he had those similarities, I was not initially put off by him. I feel like most guys are not bad guys. But when he gave me this gift, just like that guy did when I was 29, and the love bombing stuff he was saying with it after just barely meeting me, you know, like those things, they were all boom, 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 like the same pattern. And it just made me feel like I could not breathe. It brought all of those feelings back up to the surface, and like my spidey senses were like screaming. And I'm even logical enough to know they're not the same person. And in my brain, I'm like, he may not be like that. He may not be like that at all. But my limbic system was like warning bells going nuts. He helped us build that day, but I was dying inside. That brief window of time where my stress had sort of lessened and I felt like I was back on the right path, it just all shattered in a moment. I did not hire Helper Guy to work again after that. The weather was changing really fast and it was getting too cold to build hyper-adobe. If the temperatures go below freezing, your hyper-adobe can't cure properly. And it was super sad because we had only just reached ground level with his help. So we had like finally made progress and at least got to ground level. I want to pause here and mention a story from one of the first few days that I was on my property. Some of my neighbors had mentioned that there were two guys out near us that were also building with earth bags, and they asked if I wanted to meet them. So Kendra and I followed my neighbors over to our other neighbors who are the earth bag builders out there, and one of them was right at the front of their property. So we ended up just parking and chatting with him. He was super nice. They had like a small, kind of like a shed size super adobe structure partially built on the front, like towards the front of their property. They had like a ton of buckets everywhere that I'm not totally sure. Like, I don't know if they were using them to collect dirt so that they could just like kind of power through when they're filling bags, or if they're just using them as bathroom, or who knows what else. Like, you kind of come up with wild solutions sometimes for things out there. But anyway, it was two brothers, and the one brother we were chatting with, and the other brother was further back on the property, and he was just like digging frantically. Almost like, he seemed almost like he had taken like uppers and was just boom, like powering it out. Dirt going everywhere, but just digging a trench or a hole or something at full speed. It was actually really impressive. I was like, he has to be really strong to just be going that hard, continuously digging this hole. And then there was this part of me that was like, man, he hasn't even looked up. Like, does he even know we're here? But you know, they had a dog that was barking like crazy. It's like, he has to have heard that dog and like at least seen that there were people here, but he's not even gonna like stop and wave or anything. Like, that's kind of odd, you know, but whatever, everyone's different. As we're chatting with the other brother, he was telling us like, yeah, we've been out here for 2 years living in this tent, and they had a tent on the ground. I'm guessing that they had an area like dug out under the tent because the tent seemed pretty low, but that's smart. If you have a tent out there, it's good to dig a hole first and then put the tent like in the hole, because otherwise your tent's just going to blow away. But I could not believe that they were living in a tent in the crazy hot summers and the brutally cold winters, and they had been doing that for 2 years at that point. I really felt for them. I was like, man, I hope they finish their stuff soon. Winter was obviously coming up and they didn't have that super adobe structure finished. It didn't look close to being finished. We left and Kendra and I were like, dang, that one brother was like going for it. Like, he was digging holes like there was no tomorrow. And then I remember thinking, you know, how funny that was at the time. But at the point that I just paused my story, you know, on my property where we'd been laying hyper adobe bags as much as we could every day. We had only just reached ground level and winter was there. If I didn't have any other option, like, I would have been living in my car. And the summer's brutal, the winter's brutal, spring's brutal because of the crazy winds that are also super dangerous. It was actually like the best time of year to be building, was like September, you know, and that's when we met him. And I was thinking, yeah, you know what? If I had been out there for 2 years already and I was still trying to finish my hyper adobe structure before winter, I wouldn't be stopping and chatting with people either. I think as much as my body could, I would just be moving as fast as I could to get that stuff built. So it's so funny because at the beginning of my time there, I was like, man, that guy didn't even say hi. It's kind of odd. And then by the end of my time on my property, I was like, I 100% get it. I get it. I feel for you, dude. Like, in fact, were you upset that your brother was chatting with us, stopping and chatting with us because you were losing precious building time? Tangent over. I'll get back to my story. I eventually did tell Helper Guy, like, hey, not interested in you dating wise. I can't remember exactly what I wrote. I really tried to put so much thought into it. I try so hard when stuff like that happens to put a lot of thought into it, to try to like be as nice as possible. I'm still not great at it, you know? But anyway, he only had, I would say, like a medium emotional reaction to it. Like he was a little bitchy in his response and then he chilled out. I mean, that's obviously like best case scenario. He thankfully didn't try to attack me. He didn't try to stalk me, you know, or anything like that. Thank God. Back to the build, since I shifted away from Hyper Adobe and I now had my shed home, I wanted to get that home winter ready. That meant getting insulation and getting it installed, which insulation is crazy expensive. That's insane. I did not know till I went to buy insulation how expensive it is. That's something I hadn't priced out because I really hadn't been planning on buying any because Hyper Adobe is self-insulating. One morning during this time, I woke up, turned on my generator so that I could turn my stovetop on to cook breakfast, and my solar generator was completely dead. Completely freaking dead. The day before it was at like 80% or something crazy high, and now it was at a 0 out of nowhere, and it had never done that. That solar generator was my backbone. I powered all of my tools from it, my indoor cooking stove, my cement mixer, charged my devices, charged all of my lights. I was counting on it to charge my Starlink so that I could work remote for the winter from my tiny home shed, and it was dead. It was totally dead. I drug it out, I plugged it in, not getting any charge from my solar panels. I was so upset. I got on my phone, I was looking up solutions for it, trying to figure out, like, you know how sometimes with electronics you just need to hold down 2 random buttons for a certain amount of seconds and then all of a sudden it works like magic again. Like, just trying to find something like that. I found nothing like that. I freaking cried. I was like so destroyed. Like, this was like the last thing that was keeping me going, was having this power generator. It was literally powering my whole existence. Out of everything that like broke or didn't work, this was by far the most painful loss. I joked about this then and I joke about it now still, is that EcoFlow stole my soul. It, like, when that generator died, it took my soul with it. It was a Sunday, so Grounded Coffee was totally closed. They're connected to like what seems like a mega church and like a strip mall, so they don't even fuck with Sundays. They're just doing church all day, so I knew I couldn't go there. I tried going to other coffee shops in the area, and like when I would show up to the address, it would just be permanently closed or nothing there. So Grounded really was like the most reliable coffee shop in the area. But on Sundays, I knew Black Smuggler's Winery would be open, so I waited for them to open, and poor Tony like drug my solar generator over there with me and into his winery. Oh my God, he really is so nice. Him and his wife are so nice for letting me do that. And I started digging through the internet again, trying different things. I tried plugging my generator in to see if it would power through their power supply. Nothing. I contacted EcoFlow's customer service. I wrote them an email. If you want to file like an issue with your solar generator from them, they want the serial number, and the serial number is on the bottom of the unit. The bottom of the unit gets, at least in my situation, freaking wrecked. You know, like that thing's in and out constantly. The shipping container, to the freaking dirt outside, to into my car, into my tiny home shed, and back and forth constantly. So the bottom where it had the serial number, that serial number was like almost all the way ripped off. That thing was gone. So I couldn't file it like through their system on the website because I didn't even have that number. So I emailed customer service. I was so sad, but I was trying to stay positive. Like, it's gonna get fixed. I just bought this thing. Like, it's gonna get fixed. Kendra had to go back home officially this time for good. So I got her dropped off at the airport. I got back to my property. I spent like the next few weeks, it's hard to remember at this point, messaging back and forth with the EcoFlow team, trying to troubleshoot the situation. Eventually, they asked me to ship my solar generator to them so that they could repair it. During the time before shipping off my generator, before that, like during the time where I was just emailing back and forth with them, I continued to work on my land. I installed a little wood burning stove in my tiny home shed. I had bought this little tent stove because I was planning on putting it into a Hyper Adobe structure that would already be fairly naturally thickly insulated. But since that didn't happen, I decided to put it in my tiny home shed instead. I didn't do the best job installing the stovepipe going out of the tiny home. I was in like a bad headspace and I was planning on coming back and like reinforcing it more, and I did not get around to that. Also, you really need your stovepipe to your wood burning stove to clear the roof of your building, like at least a foot. And mine, it just came with like a really short stovepipe because it's made for a tent. So I did not have enough stovepipe to go up. I still tried to light it because I was like, I've only ever seen stovepipes sticking out above homes, but I didn't know why necessarily, like I never thought about it a lot. I've spent most of my life just thinking about trying to survive. I wasn't like analyzing stovepipe and air movement and stuff. But anyway, you really need that. That's vital that it goes up that high, because actually creates the airflow to pull the smoke through the pipe and out instead of just filling your space with smoke. So I filled my tiny space with smoke. I learned things by doing and failing. What can I say? I added more stovepipe to my to-do list after that, and I got to try to figure out what to do about the bathroom situation, because I'm like, okay, I got my little tiny home. I'm still gonna have to cook outside since my generator's dead. What can I do about my bathroom situation, because the hyper adobe structure I was trying to build was going to be that. And I thought, well, what if as a temporary solution, I timber frame out the rest of it? It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. I bought a bunch of 2x4s and nails, and I started making a bunch of cleats, which are used to sit on top of hyper adobe. Cleats are often used to connect the roof to the hyper adobe structure. So it's like a piece of wood with a bunch of nails sticking up through it to catch on to hyper adobe that you put on top of it. But you've also already secured some kind of wood to that, so it braces everything together. I got to work framing out my bathroom, but this was a whole mess on its own. As was common on my land with me doing stuff. Since Kendra and the worker guy and myself were all new to hyper adobe, our bags, they didn't look very good. They're pretty lumpy. I mean, as much as we tried to tamp them even and stuff, they were not the best looking bags. They were not super level. We tried. We really did, but they were not. So, I've got this like lumpy foundation, which is really not a great foundation to start building from. And then I went to hammer all the nails through the cleats, and I could not get the nails to hammer through. And I'm like, I've nailed stuff in my life before. I've totally nailed through wood many times, so many different things. For the life of me, I could not get these nails through the wood. So I even got out my drill and drilled pilot holes, still could not get them through. And I was like, I don't have a lot of time. I don't have time to sit here for like 8 hours a day trying to get a nail through a piece of wood. So I did what I didn't want to do, but needed to be done. If it were a permanent structure, I don't think I would want to do this ever. But since it was supposed to be temporary, I got out screws and I just started putting screws through the cleats, and I did all my framing with screws. And I know that's like a huge no-no, but I needed a solution. There are some screws that I think are approved for framing. I just don't know which ones they are, and I highly doubt that I had those. But I just kept trying to move forward. I was like, it's temporary. Just get it done. You'll be so thankful in the winter that you have some kind of enclosed space to go to the bathroom in. I only got it partially built. I kept worrying about the hyper adobe really not being heavy enough to hold the cleats down. And I got worried that once I started adding in the plywood, that the structure was just going to blow away in the wind. And I kept trying to figure out in my mind how to strengthen it so that that wouldn't happen, and I could not really get to a good conclusion. So I left it with the framing there, and it is one of the most embarrassing things I've ever made in my life. It is so wonky and terrible. During that time for the build, I needed a way to charge the batteries for my tools, and so I was going into Grounded Coffee sometimes, spending my 75 cents on a tea, and I don't even drink tea. Or I was going to Black Smuggler's Winery and charging there, and it's really nice of them to let my dirty desert rat ass into their winery to charge the batteries for my tools. I really appreciate that so much. With my generator completely dead and having no power and no internet, I didn't know how I was going to have a remote job. That's what I had been applying for. One of my neighbors, she was saying that she used to do merchandising through this one company. So she she gave me the link to that and I went on there, but all the jobs were at least a 2-hour drive away one way. There was nothing in our general area, even an hour. Like that's what I was planning on driving, an hour to go do that kind of work. But like everything was a 2-hour drive one way. So it's 4 hours total of commuting each time I would go to work. And the pay was not great. I was realizing that I'd mostly be paying for the gas money to get to the job. Ultimately, that did not work out. At this point, I entered into what I call Hell Week. Hell Week kicked off with my dad getting into a really bad accident and having to be rushed to the emergency room via ambulance and go into surgery. Then I got a call from one of my best friends and I could barely hear her. Her voice was really raspy and low. She had been attacked and almost killed, and she was struggling to talk because during the attack she had been strangled really hard. Two people that I really loved most in my life, I get choked up. We're like going through like horrible stuff. I didn't think I'd get choked up because it's been a year and they're both fine. But it was really hard to think of people like that I love just like going through bad stuff. And my brain just started like spinning after that. I was just standing out there like in the dirt, looking at my failed homestead, my near empty bank account, my dead generator. And I was asking myself, like, what am I doing here? I am totally alone. I'm nowhere near my friends and family. I am throwing everything I have into this sinking ship. My parents are in their retirement years. They're only getting older. Like, honestly, how much time do I really have left with them? What if my friend gets attacked again and he actually like kills her this time? That may sound like a crazy thought to some people, but her attacker lives on the same property as her. They only held him in jail overnight, and when he was released the next day, he went back to that property and she just got out of there. So she was terrified and living in her car, homeless, with her 2 dogs. And I know a lot of people say she can call the police. They only do so much. I felt like just this mountain of stress weighing on me from everything. And then 2 dogs showed up that I had agreed to take care of them. They had been abandoned on a property near mine the month before, so they had just been living outside on the property for a month, and my neighbor, she noticed and was giving them food during that whole time. So they at least were being fed. She had also arranged for this person that drives dogs from the New Mexico desert up to Colorado to a shelter to find them homes. So she had arranged for them to get a ride up there, but that couldn't happen for another like 3 weeks, I think. The dogs showed up in the afternoon, and earlier that day I was actually going to go pick them up myself from the property. And I was talking to my neighbor and she said, like, just be careful. There are 2 men. One of them has a huge gun and they're just like walking down the road. And I totally misunderstood which road she was saying. Like, my brain was not exactly working right at this time. You know, I was like very distracted with what was going on all around me in my personal emotional life. So I head out in my car and I'm heading down what road I thought they were not walking down, but it happened to be the road they were walking down. And yeah, there really were 2 men, one with a huge gun, just strolling down the road in the middle of the desert. I have no idea where they came from. I have no idea where they're going, but I was thankful that I was able to see them from a distance and be able to turn around and just hightail it back to my property. Unfortunately, they were heading in the direction of my property, and so I just grabbed my gun and I was just hanging out, waiting, watching the streets to see if they were coming anywhere near me, because I didn't want to unpack anything and then all of a sudden, 2 guys are heading my way with their giant gun. Now I need to try to pack my stuff up. I didn't want to deal with that. So I was like, I'm not working on anything. I'm gonna hang out armed, watch for them. If they start coming my way, I'm gonna get in my car and leave, you know? It was a good plan. Thankfully, they didn't come my way. They just moved on through and I didn't hear about anything happening with them. The dogs were thankfully so sweet because they were pretty big dogs for me. I'm used to really little dogs and they're definitely not little. They're pretty big boys, but they were thankfully just such sweethearts, and they were so excited to have a human to hang out with, and they were thankfully both potty trained. Like, there were so many things that came up once they were on my property that I was like, oh my god, what if they're not potty trained? Oh my god, what if they're aggressive, you know? No, they were just like so incredibly sweet, and I just felt really bad because I was still trying to build my crappy framing for my bathroom that was never meant to be, and crying a bunch because I was so worried about my friend getting attacked again, or, you know, something with my dad, because there were issues with when he was staying in the hospital, something happened, and he was thankfully taken care of and everything was, you know, eventually ended up being fine, but I was just absorbed in my own stress. Ran into town because I wanted to get them a bunch of food and treats. When I got back, I parked my car and I had my trunk open. I was really in my head about everything that had happened as I was unloading my car. I was heading back to my car to get the dog, and I'm stomping towards my car and I hear ch-ch-ch, and I just stopped in my tracks. Just ahead of me, just below my open trunk, on the ground, on the inside of my back tire, is a coiled up rattlesnake, and he's staring right at me. My neighbors had warned me that the rattlesnakes in the area, a lot of them were different than traditional rattlesnakes. They had apparently evolved out of using their rattles, and they were hyper aggressive. They would chase you. My rattlesnake on my property, thank God, was different. Thankfully, he was a traditional rattlesnake. He let me know he was not happy with me marching towards him. I am so thankful to this day that he is not one of those other rattlesnakes. After he warned me of his presence and I stopped in my tracks, I just started backing up, still watching him, because I was worried that if he was aggressive and did start to chase me, I needed to know that. That's really important information to know. And once I felt like I was a decent distance away, then I turned around and started walking faster while looking over my shoulder to make sure that he was not following me. Thankfully, he didn't follow me. I walked around my tiny home and then I was like peeking at him from behind my tiny home. And thankfully, he just slinked away on his own, and I watched him move away from my car and down the road. Rattlesnake season was over at this point, but I guess no one updated his calendar because he did not realize that, and he was still up roaming around. And that was another scary thing about being out there that I had not quite figured out the right response for, which is a rattlesnake bite. It was something that was on my mind a lot because I knew that rattlesnakes were in the area. I knew that as soon as there was food in an area, there would be crumbs. And as soon as there were crumbs, there would be mice. And as soon as there were mice, there would be rattlesnakes. Kind of works like that. And I really tried to keep my area as clean as possible. But when you're eating all your meals and cooking all your meals outside in a windy area, shit's gonna blow around. There's gonna be crumbs. Anyway, once you're bit by a rattlesnake, the clock starts ticking. When I was out there, everyone said, oh, you only have 30 minutes. And after that time, they can't do anything to save you. And I was 40 minutes from the nearest hospital or clinic or whatever. So my plan that I had was, if I were to be bit, call 911 as I was driving towards a main road to see if I could just meet an ambulance somewhere along the way. I had looked into anti-venom, and it was difficult because there's like anti-venom on Amazon. And Kendra and I were doing research, and she's like, yeah, it's there, but like some websites are saying that stuff's garbage. It doesn't really work. I couldn't ever figure out exactly what anti-venom would actually work and I should have on hand. And so I never ordered any because I didn't want to buy something that potentially wouldn't work. Then I was doing some research before recording this because I knew if I say something wrong, people will let me know. And I'd rather just try to like get the information out right. And according to the internet, it says, obviously seek help as soon as possible because yes, the clock does start ticking, but it says really you should receive the anti-venom within 30 minutes to 2 hours. So that really changes something. If I knew that, I would have been calmer out there. I would have been like, okay, not ideal. Don't want a rattlesnake bite. Don't want to deal with the poison. But if I know I have up to 2 hours, I'm going to be a little more calm than if I think I only have 30 minutes. And that's not a good thing because when you have a rattlesnake bite, you should really stay as calm as possible to keep the venom from spreading faster in your body. Whatever, I know now. I learned. Okay, back to Hell Week because this was all still in Hell Week. My friend who had been attacked called me and she was really wanting some help. I felt horrible because I was like, what do? I have 2 dogs now and I can't just pick up and leave. So I thought, well, maybe a shelter could take them in till they get their ride up to Colorado. I was emailing shelters, calling them, nothing. Everything's full. No one could take them in. Stress was building with each day. It got to the point where it almost felt like there were like screaming sirens in my ears every day. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, making the wrong decisions. I was really worrying about everything. And thankfully, one of my neighbors got a hold of me and she was able to take the boys in. She is an absolute freaking angel. That was a gift from God, I swear. And she texted me a few months after that she actually decided to keep the boys. She didn't end up sending them to Colorado. She loves them so much that she kept them. And this is another really important lesson that I learned about living out in the New Mexican desert. If you help a dog in that area and you take them in, congratulations. You just got a dog. It's yours. You most likely will not be able to find a shelter for that dog. I was even calling shelters outside of my county, but if you're not living in that county, they don't fuck with you. And the shelters in my county were completely maxed out because there are people that I really, if hell is a real thing, they are going there because they will just take dogs that they don't want and go drop them in the desert. It is beyond me how someone could do that to an animal. And it happens all the time out there. It is so depressing and horrible. While I lived there, I just kept thinking, I think this area is cursed. Like, partly joking, but kind of partly not. Did a gypsy curse this desert? I got the dogs dropped off. When I returned to my property, I realized that this was not working at all. Not working at all in any way. And I started to figure out a new plan. I really didn't have money now. There was nowhere for me to go but back to my parents. As much as I did not want to move there, I was really thankful to at least have that as an option. I had been thinking about moving closer to them anyway after my dad's accident. It really made me realize that my time with them is so precious. So I began making plans for the move. At this point is when I shipped my solar generator back to EcoFlow to get repaired, and I gave them my parents' address as the return address because I knew at this point that I was leaving my property. One afternoon during this time, I saw this red truck kind of just like bombing down what I always refer to as the main street in our area. It was like a couple streets over, but I could see it because it's pretty flat out there and there really aren't trees. I didn't really think anything of it, and then maybe 10 minutes later, I just finished peeing, so it was pretty good timing that right as I pulled my pants up, over this little hill emerged a red truck. I didn't know if it was the same one, but I never saw red trucks out there, so I was like, maybe it's the same one, maybe they're just out on a drive. They made their way past me. They drove up this side road that literally almost no one ever drove up. There's 2 cars that came across there the entire time I lived there. But they drove past and I waved, they waved, whatever. I was doing my thing on my property, just trying to ready things to move. After sunset, I was inside and I was just chilling in bed, reading, when I started to hear this loud rumble in the distance. And it was getting louder and louder. And I realized, oh, there's a truck heading my way on that same almost never used side street. Trucks and cars would occasionally drive by on the other street that my property was on, because it was on a corner. At night, occasionally someone would drive by. So it's not like it was something that never happened, but it was definitely not common, especially on that side street. It literally never happened on that side street. The engine got so loud, felt like it was shaking my tiny home. I was like, it's shaking my brains. It's the idling of that truck engine is so loud, and I could hear that they had turned onto the more used street in front of me. And I was waiting for them to get past so I could concentrate on my book again. But then they just stopped, and they stopped in front of my tiny home. The way my tiny home is set up is it has 2 windows out one side, and then there's a wall here with no windows, and that wall faces the street. So if this is the wall, they turned around the corner and then they just stopped here. And I'm laying in bed and my house is rumbling and my brains are rumbling, and I'm like, are they gonna keep going? Is there a animal in the street? Or maybe they're lost. I don't know. They just sat there with the truck on, idling super loud. Eventually I got out of bed just to try to see what's going on, something happening. I couldn't see anything because my windows weren't facing that direction, but I could see their headlights were shining and illuminating the road. And I was like, okay, this is weird. This never happened. So I grabbed my gun and my machete and I waited because I did not know if someone was hurt. I didn't know if I was being robbed. I didn't know at all what was going on. I couldn't see. see, and I was not going to step outside my home and find out. As I was waiting with my weapons, I was trying to like hear if I could hear anyone walking or talking, but the idling of the truck was so loud, that's just literally all I could hear. So I couldn't really gather any other information. Then eventually the truck starts moving again. And as it's moving down the street away from my house, I can see it's a red truck. At this point, my brain's going, maybe that person that was just driving around earlier wasn't just driving around, because what people would, like thieves would do out there, is they would comb the roads looking for targets. So it made just, could have been two different red trucks, one that drove down the main street and one that came up mine. For all I know, I don't know, but it made it seem like it had the potential to be someone combing the area to rob people. When they stopped in front of my house, I still have no idea why they stopped, but like people would stop to steal stuff from you. So it really made me worried that this red truck potentially could be a malicious character. And while I was questioning this behavior and wondering, what the deal was with them now, they became, obviously they became suspicious to me. I got worried for my neighbors in the direction that they were heading. I decided at this point to post to the Facebook group and just say, hey, anyone know anything about this truck? They're heading in this direction right now. They came from this direction, they're heading in this direction. And the first response was pretty nice. It was just someone saying, oh, that sounds like so-and-so. And I'm like, okay, that's good. Like it made me feel at ease. Like, all right, it's probably just a neighbor, I appreciated the nice response. And I had seen other people make posts in the Facebook group talking about certain cars that potentially could be suspicious in the area. And they would write stuff like, stay safe, everyone, and things like that. And I didn't even write anything like that. I was just curious, like if someone knew that was so-and-so, like that's awesome. I just want to clear it up and let it be a way to let people know in that direction that there's someone heading their way if it wasn't something that they trusted. After that first like nice response, what followed was like pretty annoying and frustrating and confusing. The girl who was driving the truck was so offended that I thought she was suspicious. She didn't think she was doing anything suspicious at all, which is nuts. Like I learned quickly when driving out there that you don't stop in front of people's properties. Like if they have a structure, don't stop there. Like if you need to stop, you go past it a little ways. Don't give people something to worry about. It's not a safe area. There aren't police just right there. There are people out there all the time robbing the properties. Why would you ever stop in front of someone's property, especially at night? Everyone that I spoke to out there warned me about all the thieves out there, that they're out there all the time. Every single person, every single conversation. So this is not like something not known. And that girl's in the Facebook group, so she sees the posts about it too. So this is not something that's new. Stopping in front of someone's structure or stuff can make it look like you're either going to rob them then, or that you're looking to see if there's something to come back to get later. This is not complicated. In fact, while I was living out there in the area, a veteran who just had his leg removed had his entire home stolen in broad daylight. His whole house, including his solar setup. And his house was like a shed house like mine, but it was twice as long as mine. Full of his stuff. Poof, gone, stolen, in broad daylight. And I get like, if you're driving out there, sometimes you do need to slow down or stop, and there could be someone's structure nearby. Sometimes you have to turn the corner. Sometimes there's an animal. There are things that can cause that, but you try to avoid it as much as possible. So yes, stopping in front of my house for a long time in the dark at night is very suspicious. She can think what she wants. That is suspicious. It still to this day like blows my mind that she could not even grasp like the faintest bit of empathy for that situation, being that she lives out there too. The guy that would deliver my water, he delivers water all over that area. He didn't even stop in front of someone's house, but he was just driving down one of the main roads that a lot of people live down to deliver water. And this guy did not like that he drove past his property and he shot out his back window. He completely shot the window out, and the water guy hadn't even stopped his car. His window still shot out. I saw it every time he delivered water. So that girl that drives the red truck can like act like I'm crazy all she wants. If she continues to drive that way out there, she will get shot at and potentially shot. And I'm sure she'll feel victimized by that. She'll be confused as to why it happened. It's so strange because other people in the group, they chimed in that I should just smile and wave and just other dumb stuff like that. Me just like being calm and like trying to give my neighbors also a heads up that something could be heading their way was somehow me being like paranoid and unfriendly. After that, I decided I was done with the Facebook group. But on the positive, I ended up finding a realtor before I left and selling my property not long after I moved off of it. When I got to my parents' house, my fixed generator showed up with like a new part that rattled inside of it. I got it out and hooked it to my solar panels and it was dead. So all that time they had it for, I don't know, 3 weeks maybe, repairing it. It's hard to remember now. But all that time, finally got the generator back and it still did not work. And I was thinking, man, what if I was still on my property? Hoping that the generator would be totally repaired and I'd be able to like maybe get Starlink then and do remote work and like be able to feed myself. That would not have happened. That would have been horrible. So I had to send it back in, and I think I'll make another video about all my failed solar and talk about everything, like more of the details that happened with that. But I will give you guys this warning, which is do not buy your solar generator from a third party. Don't buy it from a third party dealer. Buy it directly from the manufacturer. I don't care if they're having a sale, you will regret it. You will regret it. So that is my story of moving off grid and failing. And yes, I'm currently living with my parents again. I'm thankful I'm not dying in the desert. I've spent the last year applying for jobs and not hearing back from anyone really. I have 15 years of graphic design experience and nobody wants me. Because that hasn't been working out, I've obviously been looking at other things that I can do. And I saw some videos on Instagram where you could get government grants to start a farm. And I thought, that would be really cool. I would love to start a specialty crop farm. So far, I've not been able to get the person in charge of the grants on the state level to call me back. And then I hate digging through the federal grant website, but they sent me an email the other day that they just redesigned it. So I went and checked it out and it's so much easier to search for grants. And it made it easier to realize that there were no farming grants for an individual or small business. That was hard to see. If you've made it this far and you've thought any of this was helpful, interesting, entertaining, please do me a solid and hit the like button below. And if you're feeling extra generous or just really bored during the holidays, please tap on the link in the description box below to my Element Pillows shop on Zazzle. You do not need to buy anything. You don't have to purchase anything to do this. All I need you to do is just click around on some of the pillow listings, like actually view the listing of the pillow and click back and click on a different one if you feel like it. Just one if you can. I know that seems weird, but it is crazy helpful and it lets Zazzle know that people care about those products. With all that said, thank you so much for watching my series. And genuinely from the bottom of my heart, I hope that your off-grid experience is much better and much smoother than mine. Thank you so much for watching. Damn, Sophia.